The Geonosian brainworms were first introduced in the animated Clone Wars show during the Legacy of Terror episode, where clone troopers accompanied by Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka were exposed to the species while performing a mission on Geonosis. The Geonosian Queen Karina the Great used these worms to invade the minds of enemies along with her own subordinates so that she could control their minds through a hive mind. The worms invade the host's brain by entering through the nostril and burrowing into the brains of the host. While she wasn't able to control the mind of a Jedi Knight or Jedi Master, she was able to control the mind of a Jedi Padawan, when one of them crawled into the brain of Barriss Offee. These worms not only control the brains of living creatures, but they are able to control the brains and bodies of dead hosts as well, making them a formidable opponent in life or death. These worms were particularly stealthy and excellent at infiltrating strongholds, as there was no sure way to test a host for the worms initially. It wasn't until the infected Barriss Offee attacked Padawan Ahsoka Tano on their ship as they were delivering supplies that a defense was found. Ahsoka found that she could drive the worms out of the infected host's brain by making the conditions outside of the body freezing. Once the worm is driven out of the host's body, it is essentially harmless, so long as you're able to keep it from getting to another host. The Rakghoul plague was introduced in the video game Star Wars Hunters, but its first mention was actually in the German audio drama Dooku Jedi Lost, where it deviated from the source material instead of sticking with the canon lore. It was also mentioned to be the Rakghoul disease in the original Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic video game, and were always these nifty little guys you'd encounter in the underground of Taris. Rakghouls were Sith-spawned mutants that were first created by Sith Lord Karness Mur, and after an incubation period of 6 to 48 hours, the bitten or scratched victim would transform into an infected Rakghoul themselves. These hideous beasts had an appetite for living flesh, and they were considered to be non-sentient, as they relied on their animalistic urges to eat whatever they could. Without the force powers of the Sith, controlling these beasts was essentially impossible, as they would essentially just be set loose to cause chaos on a population. The plague was spread through the same means as the zombie plague, as bites or scratches from infected Rakghouls would spread the disease. And every Rakghoul in existence was known to be infected. Eventually, Revan managed to find a serum that halted the progress of the infection in people who'd been bitten, but aside from this, once someone was attacked, that was pretty much the end of their sentient life. Project Blackwing was essentially created in order to unlock the keys to immortality, but just like every other attempt, it ended poorly. In their attempt to find the key to never dying, the Empire discovered the Blackwing virus, which was also referred to as the Sickness. Sith scientists discovered the virus while they were trying to find a way to revive necrotic tissue in humans. In turn, they discovered a way to bring their dead troopers back to life as full-fledged zombies. The troopers that came back moved much slower than when they were alive, but they didn't react to damage and had a higher resistance. Just like the Geonosian brainworms, hosts that were infected with the Blackwing virus were able to communicate with one another like a hive mind mentality. Project Blackwing was active in 13 BBY, and this is where Emperor Palpatine got the name for Death Troopers once they were established as a unit. Troopers that were housed at the secret Imperial base on Dandaren were infected, and the outbreak threatened to spread to every corner of the galaxy. The army on this planet ended up earning the name Army of the Dead, after heavy troopers and scout troopers got infected and joined their ranks. With Project Blackwing being a threat to the entire galaxy, the Empire and the Rebels fought to contain and destroy the outbreak on the planet, and they were seemingly successful the first time around. In order to do so, the Empire used containment measures as well as deploying Death Troopers, which had been created using the infected crew of the Vector. Later, a second outbreak happened, and this time, the Rebels were the ones to eliminate all traces of the threat. Force-sensitive beings are some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, but to eat the Force requires a terrifying level of power and sensitivity. The Shri Ka Rai, also known as the Nameless, were creatures that preyed on the living Force, and this means that they're natural enemies of any sentient Force users such as Jedi or Sith. Dealing with one of these creatures would result in hallucinations, complete disconnection to the Force, and death, depending on how close and how long you're stuck near one. During the time of the High Republic, these creatures were used as a way to combat Force users, and centuries later, the Eye of the Nile Marchion Ro was able to control the creatures, and use them to try and destroy the Jedi Order. Ro managed to use them to keep the Jedi from saving the Starlight Beacon space station, and he even used them to execute the captive Jedi Grand Master Pratre Vader. These creatures were from the planet Sophros in wild space, and they were hatched from large eggs that were beautiful like precious jewels. If someone was lucky enough not to die during their encounter with the Shri Ka Rai, they were left in a husk state, where they were petrified and left devoid of their sentient life. It was as if they were made of stone, and eventually they would be reduced to ash. There are a number of Sith Lords that should be feared over the course of Star Wars history, but one of the most fearsome warriors of the dark side was Darth Nihilus. He wasn't a traditional Dark Force user, as he was basically a sentient void that was able to devour Force energy. Before turning to the dark side, Nihilus was a human male who lost everything during the war between the Republic and the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders. After witnessing the mass shadow generator superweapon, he craved Force energy, and he became a wound in the Force. His body was all but decayed, and all that was left on the man was his hunger for the Force, his willpower, and his armor. Before the year 3952 BBY, he and Darth Sion enacted a Jedi purge that almost drove the Jedi Order to extinction. He also destroyed the entire planet of Qatar, and in doing so, he absorbed all of the Force energy of the Jedi at the Conclave on that planet. In 3951 BBY, his ship, the Ravager, was boarded by Surik, Mandalore the Preserver, Mar, and other Mandalorians, and they put an end to Nihilus and his reign of terror. In order to harvest energy as a power source for machines, certain groups performed the process called entekment, where they stole the life force from the bodies of living beings. Depending on the size of the ship, determined how much life force was necessary to power it. The Sea Rook species was notorious for their use of this process on their own slaves, and they claimed that it was completely painless. This proved to be false, as the screams of the victims that were hooked up to the entekment rigs could be heard from far away. In the year 12 ABY, Jedi trainee Nikos Mar was diagnosed with a terminal disease, and his lover, Cray Mingla, had a droid commissioned on Coruscant that resembled Mar's body. She decided to use the entekment process to try and transfer his soul into the droid body, and she was sure that she had succeeded. She was wrong. Mar succumbed to his disease during the process, and the droid was nothing more than a machine programmed with his mannerisms and memories. The idea of soul transferring would continue to be worked on by the Sea Rook, and in the year 28 ABY, they found a way to keep the farmed souls from decaying while being held in their machine. The Jedi and Sith powers are already powerful enough to make anyone else in the galaxy look weak, but some Sith Lords were able to master a power known as a thought bomb. Lord Khan and the Brotherhood of Darkness were responsible for creating such a technique, and it's only used as a last resort. Essentially, the user channels a massive amount of dark side energy into a force vortex within themselves, and once the bomb is detonated, it ends up consuming every single force-sensitive being in the surrounding area. Not only that, but it ends up trapping their very spirit in a never-ending void that they can never return from. With one single thought bomb, a Sith Lord would be able to destroy an entire army in the blink of an eye. But it requires many unified Sith Lords in order to pull it off, so this is essentially a kamikaze technique. Not only is a thought bomb dangerous to the surrounding force-sensitive beings, but it also runs the risk for the user as well. When Khan created the technique, 3 of his Dark Jedi died during the process, and the rest of the Sith Lords were left insane, with their minds fractured. All of the ones with their minds fractured were executed before they could go on a killing rampage. Whoever was the initiator of the bomb would end up dying alongside the victims, since they're standing closest to the site of detonation. Those who ended up surviving the attack would suffer from relentless headaches, hallucinations for weeks, and the agony of the shattered souls that were imprisoned within, which would cause madness over time. When it comes to superweapons, nothing is more terrifying than the Death Star. While Starkiller Base was bigger and deadlier, the Death Star terrified the galaxy as it was created in secret and had the infamous Emperor aboard it. The Death Star was capable of hyperspace travel and had the ability to destroy planets using the super laser that was powered by Kyber crystals. While the DS-2 battle station never finished its construction, the DS-1 battle station was completely operational and finished before the rebels destroyed it. Technically, the plans for the weapon dated back to the time of the ancient Sith, but it wasn't until shortly before the Clone Wars broke out that the plans came to fruition, as Count Dooku and the Geonosians began construction on the weapon. Director Krennic and his science division, led by Galen Erso, finished construction on the superweapon utilizing the Kyber crystals. Its power was tested on Jedha first, then Scarif, before showing the galaxy just how powerful it was when it destroyed the planet, Alderaan. If it hadn't been for the actions of Jyn Erso, Cassian Andor, and the operatives of Rogue One, the fatal flaw in the design of the station wouldn't have been found, and it's very likely that the Death Star never would have been destroyed by the rebels when it assaulted Yavin 4. While there were many battle stations created throughout the galaxy, the Death Star spanned 100 miles in diameter, had a surface area of over 17,000 square miles, and consisted of 357 internal levels. The equator of the station was fitted with multiple docking ports for ships that were trapped in their several tractor beam projectors. Of course, it had its super laser, but it was also fitted with enough armaments to destroy fleets without it. Even though it was a very dangerous weapon, the true purpose of the battle station was to be a symbol of the dark side of the Force throughout the galaxy and Darth Sidious's true chokehold on the people of the universe. One black hole is terrifying enough if you fly close enough to it, but the Maw was a cluster of black holes found inside the Akkadi's Maelstrom. What makes it even more terrifying is the fact that the cluster was full of living creatures that could ensnare and destroy whole ships who got lost, such as the Summa Verminoth that was spotted in Solo: A Star Wars Story. The Maw Nebula is located near the planet Kessel, and only ships that knew the path through the maze could safely make it through without any issues. Not only did ships have to worry about creatures and black holes in the nebula, but they also had to deal with plasma and radiation that would poison anyone who wandered too long. This is why the Kessel Run is so notorious, and why Han's death run through the nebula was so heroic and dumb at the same time. In the year 44 ABY, it was discovered that the Maw was created by the Thurut Hive in order to imprison something that was even more terrifying than anything else on this list: Abeloth. Not all terrifying things are plagues or parasites, though, as Abeloth was actually an eldritch, near-immortal force being from the Fate of the Jedi legend stories. She was a primordial, godlike entity who was actually attached to the Mortis family, which we know from the Clone Wars series. Abeloth was created when the mother of the Mortis Trinity drank from the font of power and bathed in the pool of knowledge. This ended up corrupting her, and Abeloth was born. She's able to shapeshift, control people's minds, produce illusions, and warp reality to her will. One of her most powerful abilities is the fact that she can create any number of avatars across the expanse of the entire galaxy. While she's deemed to be nearly unkillable, she was imprisoned by the Ones quite a few times over the course of her history. Following the Skywalker saga and Legends, Jacen Solo actually released her from one of her prisons after he became the Sith Lord Darth Caedus, and it came down to Luke, his son Ben, Mara Jade, and other recruits to imprison her yet again.